everyone. My name is Teresa Homsi, and you're listening to the special Earth Week podcast series where we talk sustainability. I'm joined here today by Dr. Alison Arnold to discuss human sustainability. Dr. Arnold, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well today. Thank you for this conversation.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to have you today. So we're just going to jump right in, and I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, who you are, what you do.
Sure thing. So once again, I'm Alison Arnold, and I'm with CMU. I'm with the Interdisciplinary Center for Community Health and Wellness at the university, and it's a multi-college collaboration that really looks at the resources and the expertise within CMU and connects that most specifically to look at community health priorities. And so in our region, when we think about health and wellness, it really is under a broad context of all the factors that can contribute to one's quality of life, their health, and really over the lifespan, beginning in early child development all the way through, across the years of their lifespan.
Yeah, so when I was looking for someone to find for this, I found this Interdisciplinary Center for Community Health, and the two words that kind of stuck out to me were interdisciplinary and community, because I thought that was really relevant to the subject of sustainability. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, what does sustainability mean to you from your respective background or from your personal experience?
Well, I think those two key words really ring true to me as well, Teresa, because when we think of community and we think of health and wellness, I mentioned it's something that is a lifespan point of view, and that we recognize that one's health is totally connected to the environments, the places and spaces and the relationships in which one is living and growing up. And so those are all, many of them are community-based. There's this nesting that's kind of ecological when we think about health and development and nurturing health across a lifetime. So when we think about children and their earliest development, if they have safe and supportive and stable relationships that are nested in their growing up, that's going to help them develop a healthy brain and body and nervous system. But when we look at family units that may be nested in communities, we also have to make sure that those roots of the community also have those nurturing factors. And unfortunately, not all communities can say that they have these nurturing roots. And even in our immediate region of CMU, we are really working with communities that realize that, we need to strengthen our root systems for a number of our children, families, and adults in the community, whether it would be access to healthy food supplies. So there's food security that is important to health. There's all kinds of other issues that are in community-based, environmental safety. We have communities not so far away who have struggled with the quality of water, which has led to a whole issue of health that certainly is going to impact children, but it's going to impact generations upon generations. And when we think about sustaining health, it's important that we understand that our growing up, our healthy development is intricately tied to the environment around us. And that environment is not just the physical environment, it's social relationships, it's lack of isolation, it's connectedness to a sense of community that one lives in.
On a more personal note, what is your relationship with sustainability? Sort of what brought you to where you are today?
I think I had this awakening about my background in many cases comes from an early childhood education perspective. And I always knew how important those earliest years were for growing up and building strong bodies and brains. But I guess I never really considered until I came into this knowledge about how that earliest experience in families and in environments shapes our body and our neurophysiological development for our lifetime. And it can also set us up for potential health risks, future, down the road across the lifespan. And so how critically important we think about health, not as the absence of disease or the absence of illness, but what is it that we can do to sustain wellness at every point of life? Because we know that someone may have a terminal condition, but they can still feel well, and they can still feel, even though they have an illness, they can still create and sustain relationships and settings and support spiritually, socially, emotionally, physically. We can help build those sustainable relationships. So at any point in life, we can be working towards wellness, even when we may not physically have the conditions that we would define as, complete wellness.
Mm-hmm. And so I know that we're already kind of talking around this, but to just outright name it, I invited you to represent human sustainability. And so in your own words, could you explain what human sustainability means and how that might be different than just what we generally perceive as sustainability?
At its core, it's relationships. Because humans, in my deep sense of feeling, we're wired for relationships. That's our design. That's what makes us so uniquely human. The ability to establish those relationships, sustain those relationships, nurture those relationships. Not that other species don't do that, but this is a unique and wonderful miracle about human development, that it is so relationship based. So if we can strengthen relationships and the ability for us to help nurture and support and help people come to understand how important and powerful positive relationships are for sustained wellness, but also for sustained humanity, the compassion and empathy across relationships and building understanding is so critically needed right now. And understanding that the community relationship is so important as an underpinning for all of us to feel as if we are supported and able to sustain our health and well-being, and the understanding that some communities are it's not an equal playing field from community to community. And as we've seen with this pandemic, it's really shed light on that there's some terrible inequities that are structural, that go back a generation after generation, that they're not just an historical narrative, but they have actually gotten hardwired into our physiology, because we know that this relationships and these experiences, they get epigenetically connected into our sustained wellness as a individual, as a family tree, as as a family, a human family overall.
So going from there, I'm not very informed on, out of all of them, I'm not extremely informed on human sustainability, but I am seeing a lot of overlap between it and what I often talk about, social sustainability, where we're talking about equity and accessibility and oftentimes justice. So it's very interesting to hear those same words and those same concepts being brought into this when we're talking about health, because accessibility, from my experience, health is really important to sustainability. Not just for human health, but also when we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about the planet and the health of the planet, and those two things are related. So it's really, really great to hear you talk about the equity and accessibility as part of human sustainability, especially when, you bring up the pandemic as well. Everyone's access to healthcare or resources has not been the same. I mean, that's not just because of the pandemic. That's kind of always been there, at least here. And
as we begin to look at what are those inequities in health across different populations, I will say that I think the medical and healthcare fields are really looking at their models now about how care has been delivered, how we presume or assume certain kinds of health conditions across the population at large, and haven't really taken that time in some ways to look at the differences in different populations. But, when we think about chronic illness and how it presents in different populations, in communities of color, you can't not connect that to the environment and to structural issues that have been in place for decades, for years, for hundreds of years, because we know now scientifically that our environment of physical environment, social environment, racism itself as a trauma shapes one's health and well-being bodily, emotionally, and we know that kind of trauma is epigenetic, that it does get kind of intertwined with the way that our bodies develop, the way that essentially our genes get expressed and passed along. And so I think there's an awakening in the medical fields about all kinds of conditions, asthma, chronic illness, diabetes. What are not only environmental factors that have maybe predisposed certain populations for some of these chronic conditions, but also what factors of chronic racism and structural racism and historical trauma that need to be considered as well. And so I think when we look at sustainability, human sustainability, and we think about wellness and health as part of it, it's just a real easy thing to see how aligned and connected these questions are.
Mm-hmm. So going from there, what do you think we need to do to really build healthy communities? Because that's really what we're talking about, communities, the emphasis on communities. What are we supposed to do to have not just healthy, but as you say, communities where wellness is at the core of those?
Well, I think one of the things that our center's really involved in is raising awareness about not just the alarming community priorities, but that is important to raise awareness about the needs of across the community, whether that be different kinds of access to healthcare, access to services, if there's a need, if there's food insecurity in a community. So helping build awareness about what are the needs and priorities around health in the community. And that takes engaging every voice that in the community, not just someone coming in and doing a study and saying, here's what we've identified. So how do you build that space where communities have those conversations and can recognize that the wisdom for addressing and responding to some of these priorities is in the community, because that's where the roots are. And so how do you strengthen those roots? You don't bring in something else or, pour some other thing in. It really is, how do you strengthen the assets and the resources in the community? And a lot of that happens through education and engagement. So those two, kind of avenues, I think, are key to, activating the desire and interest and engagement across the communities to make it a priority that health and wellness is a sustainable and valuable thing that needs to be done.
Yeah.
There's regionally, there's an initiative that CMU is involved with and many organizations are involved with, and it's called Thrive. And that's an acronym, and it means transforming health regionally in a vibrant economy. So it connects all the avenues that, if for a community to thrive, for businesses to be successful, for the community to be attractive, for people to want to live and come and raise a family in, and attend CMU and stay in the area, to be a doctor and to practice in, for communities to be attractive in that way, to thrive, they need to understand that health is absolutely as important as economic interest. So this initiative that's underway in our region has been very broad-based, and a big component of Thrive is getting out and connecting with communities to engage the experts with the wisdom and the lived experience in rural, in more urban areas in our surrounding region, to kind of come to the table with ideas and resources.
Well, you mentioned education and engagement, and that's definitely what we're trying to do here right now, right with this podcast, with all the work that I do with the DEI and what you do with the Interdisciplinary Center. So I guess from there, do you feel like this conversation that we're having is a very mainstream one? Have you engaged with this kind of material? Do you see this kind of discourse happening in the public a lot?
Well, to be totally honest, I feel a little vulnerable in this conversation with you, Teresa, because I think we need more of these kinds of conversations. I can't even pretend that I can see this from every angle. I'm bringing my angle to this. I think that there's a tremendous opportunity to keep these lenses. It's almost kind of prismatic, that we need to kind of look at sustainability through a prism perspective of the different elements and how they reflect on each other. So I would love to be part of continued exploratory conversations across disciplines. And I think that this is wonderful that you're beginning to open up this space. So thank you. I feel a little vulnerable because I won't pretend to be an expert in all angles on sustainability or even human sustainability. I kind of see it through my own prism right now. I'd love to have that broaden, and I'd love to try to weave in more connections even beyond this conversation.
Well, just last week I was on a panel, and I kept saying, before I said anything, I kept saying, I'm not an expert, but this is blah, 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 And I had Dr. Nikita Murray tell me afterwards, stop saying you're not an expert. You're an expert in what you know. And so, I understand that vulnerability. I feel that a lot of times, like I have to clarify, oh, I'm a student, or this is not my specialization, and this is not a topic that I know a lot about.
And take that idea of being an expert in what we know and valuing that lived experience, and then go back into the community and think about how we tap into that lived experience in our communities and value that and figure out a way to engage that in our conversation. So we're all kind of experts in our own lived experience, but I'd love to travel that vulnerable few next steps about how we weave some of these together and bring these different perspectives to a conversation with one another.
Mm-hmm. I did really love how you talked about sustainability as a prism with the light, because whenever I talk about sustainability, it's always like the word I use is intersectional, because we're talking about these different, interdisciplinary is one word, but intersectional, where there's these lines and they're all just meeting and all these points, the key words here, like if you were to transcribe this conversation at the very top, like the most used words would probably be, community, health, equity, accessibility, just there's so much to it there. And so, I think that it's really cool that we do get to come at this from so many angles. Problem with that is that sometimes we kind of forget certain angles, or aren't used to considering them, especially that was your answer to if this is a conversation that happens a lot in the mainstream public. And I would agree with you. I don't think that there's enough conversations on this, and it's like that's because we need to start them, and we have to first see the prism, and it's such a huge one that it's like, oh, this isn't so easy to just bring out there. I have talked about this many times when me and Eric Urbaniak, who's my coworker, talk about sustainability. It can be very difficult because it's not always marketable. And so, it's not something easy to sell. It's not like a little, recycle, it's not a little green arrow. It's like this whole thing. Like we live in a really complicated world, and our issues and our solutions are really complex, and they're not perfect or anything, but we need to pursue them. So I'm glad that that's maybe something that you can relate in as well, coming from your background.
Absolutely. And, I think the tendency that we may be feeling in the current context is, people get stuck in a point of view, or they get invested in a certain way of thinking. And sometimes that happens in professional sectors too, where, when we spend our whole lifetime in a discipline, going deeply into a train of knowledge, sometimes to pop our heads out of that and look at another way of understanding that knowledge, it requires some exercise to do that. And so I think these kind of exercises of having different people speak with you and kind of let folks out more broadly hear these different perspectives, it just keeps our minds open. Again, that growth mindset that we're going to continue to learn more and more about this arena, that it's an ever expanding kind of landscape when we think about what can we bring together as resources, and in new ways. Even I think sometimes we think we've got the sustainability formula figured out in certain areas, and we don't. We may not, I guess. And so I think, kind of re-examining our own assumptions about sustainability is, I think, a positive thing.
Mm-hmm. And I see you building off of what I said, Dr. Murray's point about how, you're an expert in what you know, but at the same time, you'll never be an expert in everything. And so hearing other people's experiences and reflecting on what you think is also equally important. You mentioned that sometimes professionals, I would argue that experts and professionals are the ones who get most stuck into their point of view, because they're not used to being challenged. I should say they're not used to being critically challenged. They get challenged a lot, but not in an action, where that's a whole different conversation. They get challenged very rarely with critical perspectives that are, nuanced and complex. So I feel like I should clarify that.
And mindset is a phenomenon, a dynamic that the more that we are invested in our education, our discipline, all the knowledge that we've created and built in our field, the deeper we are in that, the more invested we are in that. That begins to form our mindset. And so to shift that mindset takes practice and takes us being, wanting to do that. So that's where I think interdisciplinary work really is a gift to us all, because it invites us to kind of to rise, kind of come out of our own point of view, look at a problem or an opportunity, and invite another field of knowledge, another discipline to kind of look at that together. And oftentimes that's where the innovation occurs. And we're seeing more and more professional care in health and in the field of medicine. More and more, we're seeing interdisciplinary, interprofessional teaming when it comes to really providing quality patient care, recognizing that the different, in order to treat the whole person, you might have different points of view that are all work, and that cumulatively are just a wonderful remedy for helping patients heal and thrive.
Mm-hmm. And sort of moving from this conversation into my next point is who do we need to get involved in sustainability? We're talking about different perspectives, so who is it that we need to get involved?
Well, I think it needs to be an approachable conversation in every forum. So how do you have the idea of sustainability be something that everybody can approach and discuss without it being initially something that is I guess, black and white kind of, I'm for it or against it kind of a charged word. So if you take the charging, the electricity out of it and just let it be an idea that we can all approach in any kind of conversation space, whether it's little children and taking care of their world as they grow up, or if it's an elder and why is it so important that that elder's lived experience is shared, broadly. My niece is working on the Navajo reservation, and she talks about how concerned they are with COVID because they're losing so many of their elders' teachings that hasn't gotten shared yet. And so I think, again, this idea of not only sustaining the environment in our communities, but sustaining our knowledge and our relationships and our exchange of wisdom from generation to generation is also a big part of sustainability for human sustainability, I think.
And to name that directly, we had another guest on, Kathleen Hart, who is the Equity Program Coordinator from the Saginaw Tribal College, the Saginaw Chippewa Tribal College, and we discussed cultural sustainability, which is directing that wisdom and that knowledge and that heritage, how we approach things, life ways and culture. So it's really amazing in this to see all of these things just in this conversation come together that are so complex, but also so necessary because they're not simplified. It's possible to get a little bit too much in there because you can speak broadly and nuanced together. But yeah, I think it would be fun to come up with 100 conversation starters about sustainability that are just totally, useful in any kind of forum, in any kind of conversation between two people, many people. It doesn't matter what your discipline is, but to just have people begin to think about this idea in ways that, isn't necessarily tied to an agenda of any sort. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is definitely, the conversation never ends. So this is our final episode of the Special Earth Week series. And so, I think it's good that we're ending on a note where it's like, oh, even though the series isn't over, the conversation doesn't end. No. And it just keeps going. So I guess now that we're kind of nearing the end of this one, what would you want listeners so far who've stuck through with us to take away from this conversation? Well, I hope it sparks curiosity about this word, sustainability. And because we're human sustainability in all of this. So I hope it sparks curiosity for more learning. And I hope that it inspires maybe some personal action on any listener's part to get involved or to reach out or to go have a conversation about this with someone else.
because that's how we kind of build the conversations that lead to people moving and becoming engaged. So I hope it sparked some curiosity, and I hope it maybe inspired some personal action.
Mhm. Yeah. And on that note, do you have any final words, thoughts, or maybe advice to some of our listeners?
No advice, because I think my final thought is we're all in this. This is every single one of us. Old, young, not even here yet, but maybe coming in another generation. So this is important for us to consider because it's for all of us here now and for all who will be coming. So it's important that we have some sense of responsibility, shared responsibility for getting clear on what's important for sustaining our health, for sustaining our communities, and why this is such an important word for all of us.
Well, thank you so much for coming in here today and having this conversation with me. The way we've been ending all of these podcast episodes, a little bit clumsily on my behalf, because I don't know how to end things. We've been saying that every day is Earth Day, and so I think that kind of brings it all together. You know, how this is a continuing thing, and future generations, people who haven't been here yet, this is going to be important to them. So, yeah, every day is Earth Day.
And we're all stardust.
Yes, that's one I have not heard yet. So we'll end on that note.